Well, glory be to God. Another great day, a great opportunity, and I just want to say thank you for being faithful to always watch the daily doses and always listening to them and sharing them with other people. You know, it takes commitment to do this because for you to develop yourself, you need to be disciplined. And you've been disciplined every single day listening to the daily doses, and I want to say thank you for doing that. Today, I'd like to encourage you from the book of Romans chapter 4 and verses 17. Romans chapter 4 verses 17. And this is concerning Abraham. Abraham had been given a promise by God, and that God had declared that he was going to be a father of many nations. And therefore, it is giving us actually a window to look into Abraham and what he did for the promise that God gave him to come to pass. In verses 17, it says, "As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of whom he believed, God, who gives life to the dead, and calls those things which do not exist as though they did." Abraham received the promise, but he did not know how the promise was going to come through. And instead of him having faith in God, he took the burden upon himself to try to make the promise of God come to pass. You see, a lot of us also have the tendency that Abraham had. We will receive the promise of God, and having received the promise of God, now we begin to act it out and make it happen. You can never make it happen because you don't know how to make it happen. You've got to allow God to make it happen. Your part is to have faith in God. And if you have faith in God, then God will make it to happen, because whatever he began, he will complete. So here we are being told that as it is written, in other words, God is telling Abraham that this has already been written. As far as heaven is concerned, it is written that I've made you to be a father of many nations. You see, nothing changes what is written. Whatever is written is final, because God finishes and then he begins. God had already finished that Abraham is going to be a father of very many nations. And therefore, when he began with Abraham, he was beginning what has already been finished. So Abraham had to catch up with God. And therefore, we are told it is already written that you are a father of many nations. So what Abraham did then, because Abraham tried everything by himself and he realized that he was not seeing the results of it. Now he realized that he was standing in the presence of him whom he believed, that is God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things that be not as though they are. In other words, Abraham kept on looking at the deadness of his body and the deadness of Sarah's womb, and Abraham kept on questioning himself and saying, how can this happen? How is it going to happen? What can I do? And all God expected of him is to believe him whom he believed. And therefore, Abraham had to stay constantly in faith, believing God, and let God cause those things that be dead and bring them to life. Why? Because he is the giver of life. He is the creator of everything, and he can bring to life that thing which seems to be dead. And therefore, Abraham began to call those things that be not as though they were. You and I are in a position today where we may be challenged on what we know we are meant to be. And therefore, what we need to do what Abraham did. Abraham agreed with God and began to have faith in God and begin to act like God. How was he acting like God? Calling those things that be not as though they were. Abraham was barren, but God called him a father of many nations. Therefore, he began to call himself, I am a father of many nations. You and I today have been called to be leaders. You and I today have been called to be parents. And you know what? Sometimes challenges come to an effect that we do not see ourselves to be who God calls us to be. But I'm here to remind you today, it has already been written that you are meant to be who God says you are. And therefore, you need to begin to call yourself who God calls you to be, having faith in God that whatever he began in your life, he will bring it to pass. Glory be to Jesus. And therefore today, don't be discouraged, be encouraged. Why? Because God has already established it that you will be whoever he says you are. Now he's waiting for you to agree with him and have faith in him that he will do exactly what he calls you to be. And therefore today, begin to call yourself who God calls you to be, and begin to have faith in God, and never let your faith move away from God, and you will be exactly who God says you are, just like Abraham was. And therefore you stay blessed and have a wonderful day.